All right, I know I am very late to this topic, but in my defense, I didn't want to talk about it. And that's because, as a fan, it's hard when nothing that has come out of any of this news is remotely reassuring. So, to start by addressing the elephant in the room, it's been a couple of weeks now since the Zion news broke, and no updates have been remotely significant, and it's clear that as legal proceedings proceed, that will continue to be the case. And of course, we now have some statements out about it. Of course, the organization is claiming that they know nothing, which, legally speaking, is going to be the only thing we'll hear from them until any sort of trial, if that happens. And it seems clear that until then, they are not going to be publicly distancing themselves from Zion. And much to the contrary, we're probably going to see mostly business as usual from here on out. And the official statement from all of Zion's parties is obviously that there's no legitimacy to any of this. And then after nearly a full week, the organization, Dumars and Gail Benson, finally put out a statement basically saying, well, we know nothing. And then Gail Benson went one little step further by doing the old, anyone can sue anybody for anything these days, so who's to say? So it's clear that things are probably going to remain unresolved for a long while and probably well into this next season. You still won't necessarily know exactly how this will affect Zion long term. So for the next long while, this will just be kind of a dark cloud looming in the distance that could potentially spell the end of Zion Williamson's career because these allegations are very extensive and very serious, and if there is any truth to any of them, could be some serious repercussions that could absolutely derail his career. And of course, if anyone was actually victimized, we want to make sure justice is enacted in its fullest. And if these allegations are mostly true, then the Pelicans have no choice but to waive Zion, and he'll likely get a lifetime ban from the league, regardless of whatever legal consequences he may face. Of course, that is the extreme possible outcome, and of course, in the past, we have seen players in similar situations continue with mostly normal careers, such as with Kobe Bryant or Derrick Rose. Of course, times were different back then, and even still, the allegations facing Zion are even possibly a bit more serious than that. The most positive outcome if you're the New Orleans Pelicans is that a judge quickly dismisses these allegations. However, public doubt will continue to follow Zion, possibly for the rest of his career, particularly if this is settled out of court. And this will hurt his trade value, no matter how much you might want to trade him right now. Currently, I would say that is probably impossible. I don't think there's a single team out there that would really dare to take on this situation at this time. And of course, people joke, well, the Charlotte Hornets brought back Miles Bridges, which is true, but that is a different situation where the legal element was resolved at that point. And of course, he was their own player, and they didn't have to give up any assets to re sign him. Right now, I don't think any team is betting on Zion or can except for the Pelicans, which is interesting because going into this offseason, it looked like maybe finally, possibly, Zion could be traded, particularly if we had been luckier to get a better draft pick. Because if we had the number one pick, if you had, say, Cooper Flagg coming in, all of a sudden it's a lot easier to get rid of one supposed generational talent. But the situation being what it is now, no matter how much Gail Benson may not like all the drama this brings, no matter how much it may seem foolish to go into next season with Zion in the starting lineup, that's probably just what it's going to be at this point, which is just another example of one way in which the Pelicans are in an absolutely inflexible, kind of doomed situation at this point. Not doomed as in necessarily the outcome's going to be horrible, although that does seem likely, just simply in their destiny is what's been set at this point. When Joe Dumars first came in, the possibility existed that things could change. But now that seems highly unlikely, and it seems likely from the beginning that Joe Dumars would be the person to ensure that not much change would occur. But now, whatever Joe Dumars intended to do with the franchise, his hands are now thoroughly tied. And we see a lot of staff exiting en masse now. Just yesterday, Bryson Graham left to go to the Hawks. This continues a trend that we saw starting last season where many Pelican staff members, both on the coaching side of things and the executive side of things, left for greener pastures, many of whom last season went to the Detroit Pistons, and this time there's a bit of a role reversal with the former Pistons GM Troy Weaver now on the Pelican staff. Many fans are rightfully very concerned about Troy Weaver's presence in all of this. I will say I don't know if Troy Weaver can really be blamed so much for the astonishing failures of the 2024 Detroit Pistons. I think there was something very strange and anomalous about that team. I don't think they were nearly as bad as their record indicated. I also think Troy Weaver deserves some credit for the players he did draft during his time there who looked pretty good on the Pistons this last season. Still, I understand people being just concerned about the fact that there has been so much turnover in such a short period of time. And for all the Pelicans' failures over the past few seasons, one thing we have seemed to have gotten pretty good at is drafting. And now we are going into an NBA draft when most of the people involved in selecting the players the past few seasons probably are not here anymore. I don't know to what degree Willie Green had an influence on who was drafted, but hardly anyone else still remains. It is funny that despite their silence on whatever other issues, Joe Dumars and Gail Benson seem to be in loud and resounding agreement that Willie Green will remain the head coach for the foreseeable future, which is a move I honestly predicted. I'm not surprised at all that Willie is staying. It's very clear that Gail Benson likes him an awful lot. Joe Dumars also does have that history with Willie Green, and they both seem to respect each other a ton. Still, Joe Dumars appears to be insulating his support for Willie Green behind the whole guise of, well, I wasn't here, so I couldn't say. Regardless, I hope and want to believe that Joe Dumars will be a disciplined enough GM that if the Pelicans disappoint again under Willie Green, then we may actually see a new head coach in charge. But I think that we'll have to wait until we at least get midway through this next season. Some continuity with Willie Green could be good for some players who showed some promise under him last season, but whom circumstances did not allow the opportunity. Given the severity of an Achilles injury, I don't think we'll see any of DeJounte Murray until at minimum January or February of 2026. And whenever he does return, there's no guarantee he will be playing in top shape, of course, after his relatively minor injury at the beginning of last season. Whenever he did return, he looked pretty terrible until he finally started to find his footing right before the other injury. Still, I think it makes sense for the Pelicans to also hold on to DeJounte Murray and also continue to bet on him making a recovery because his trade value is just a bit too low right now. Even if not for the injury, he hasn't shown much since his last couple of seasons with the Hawks, where the chemistry issues made him look not so great. Plus, there's going to be a lot of people who call into question his acumen, given that he was on the Spurs, where players tend to perform a bit better in that specific environment. And one All-Star appearance so far in all of his previous seasons is not really enough for other teams to really regard him as a real All-Star, I think. And so for now, you're looking at a starting lineup next season by the end, hopefully, of Zion Williamson and DeJounte Murray, who are likely remaining with the team, although who knows how much either of them will actually be able to play. One guy who I do expect to play because he has been very available over the last few seasons is CJ McCollum, who I do expect will remain with the team as much as some fans would really like him gone. Practically speaking, being a guy who has never made an all-star team on an expiring contract, I just doubt that he has really much trade value at all, and I think the Pelicans will not necessarily be in a rush to especially attach any assets to potentially send him out. And I know a lot of people were hoping we could potentially get some value out of CJ McCollum, but at this point it's probably too little too late. For the past season or so, I did ponder what other teams may have need for CJ's experience, leadership, and shooting ability, and while I do still think a team like the Orlando Magic could make use of all of that, at this point, at his age, making what he's making, being on an expiring contract, I don't expect any team to give out much to get him. And at this point, to be honest, I don't know how much it really even limits the Pelicans to just continue to pay him through this next season because I don't know if they're really in the position to pay anyone else anyway. I don't think they're bringing in a ton of big-name free agents this offseason, and I don't think there are that many trades that realistically exist anyway. So being up near the top of the salary cap space, I don't know. The Pelicans have bigger issues, honestly, than worrying about paying CJ McCollum. And at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if CJ remains with the team for the foreseeable future, even beyond his current contract. I mean, once he's a free agent, I wouldn't be surprised if we re-signed him to a much smaller contract, and he was actually on a fairly team-friendly deal. I think he likes the team and organization enough, in spite of all the craziness that's been going on, that he would be fine with taking a bit of a pay cut, as he recognizes that his abilities have diminished a bit. And I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if CJ McCollum continues to ride the bench for the next several seasons. Now, as for other core players like Herb Jones and Trey Murphy and Jose Alvarado, I sincerely hope the organization is not dumb enough to give away any of those guys for peanuts, and they will continue to be a core part of the rotation going forward, because even though all of those guys are no longer the youngest, and we have moved our timeline back a little bit seemingly. They are all still pretty young and on relatively team-friendly deals for the moment, and they are really crucial culture guys, and I sincerely hope that we continue to invest in them and try to build around those pieces that we still have, because otherwise my interest in the team will be far diminished if any of them are absent. I understand that with so many players you don't want to trade and so many players that you simply can't trade, then despite the amount of assets and seeming talent on this team, your ability to go after a big superstar or just make some kind of big swing this offseason is severely diminished. But I do think it is necessary for us Pelicans fans to take a step back and be realistic about the chances that a franchise such as ours could possibly garner one of the top tier talents in the league in any sort of trade or free agency, whatever, irregardless of our status as a small market, which some superstars like Giannis seem to not necessarily mind being in a smaller market. Our organizational reputation is definitely not at the highest right now, and I just don't see us as significantly being in position to actually pull one of these guys in. That doesn't mean I don't want the organization to at least try. However, if we are indeed involved in one of the big trades this offseason, it will most likely be as an auxiliary function. The only reason I have Giannis visible right now is because we might be involved simply because of the Bucks picks that we currently have, but there is always the possibility that Milwaukee could get great offers elsewhere that don't involve any of our picks and we're not involved at all. I do think that if any of our significant players like Zion or Trey Murphy are traded this offseason, it will be somehow involved with one of the bigger trades like a Giannis trade. Most likely in that case, we'd probably be getting assets back from the other teams, such as Houston. But I honestly think there's a good chance that this offseason might be a bit quieter than some people suspect. There's no specific reason to think that Milwaukee isn't necessarily going to pull the trigger on a Giannis trade right now. I understand that things seem dire in Milwaukee, but they're under no specific time crunch to make it happen immediately, at least not until Giannis demands a trade. Even if they get a king's ransom, which they should, for Giannis, any sort of rebuild will be very difficult. So I fully expect Milwaukee to do everything in their power to try to retain Giannis for the foreseeable future, even if it is just for, like, say, half a season. If for the first few months of the next season things continue to look bad, I could easily see them making a trade at the deadline. But until Giannis demands it, I don't think they're going to be in a rush to do so, because his trade value is not going to diminish. Even if Giannis doesn't get traded immediately, some other big moves could go down. Most of them will probably be connected with the draft. As far as the draft goes, in typical Pelicans fashion, I expect us to probably stay put and probably just pick someone with the 7th pick, which probably eliminates our chances of getting some of the very top prospects like Ace Bailey or Harper. Of course, both of them have been slipping a little bit in some of the draft projections. I think they had some interviews that didn't quite go so well. But that being said, I do expect both of them to still be taken in the top 5 and be thoroughly out of reach of us at 7. Now, we could, of course, try to make some kind of trade where we move up in the draft, but I think that would probably be a mistake. I'm not so certain that the Rutgers guys or anybody else high up other than Cooper Flagg is really worth trading up for. At least for us, given that I don't know how many of our assets we're really willing to part with in such a trade. If we do remain at 7, I think the best guy we could possibly pick there would probably be Fears. We certainly could use his shot creation, his ball handling ability, particularly with DeJounte Murray likely being out for most of the season. There should be an opportunity for him. Of course, we do have Jose Alvarado, but if you can draft Fears at 7, I think that is possibly the best outcome for bringing in a guy through the draft who could really change your outlook this season. I don't think Fears is as likely to go at number 7, though, as some of the dookies in the draft, like Malawak, for instance. Common Malawak could easily go top 5 as well, so if you can get him at 7, I guess you've got to be pretty happy with that. But the fit is a little bit weird, just considering we do have Yves Missi as well, who had such a great rookie season, and I don't know how much you really want to be developing 2 centers, especially if you still have Zion around as well. Once again, if you're not planning to make a trade, which I don't expect the Pelicans to do, then you've probably got to go with best available, in which case, hey, if you have Malawak and Missi, then whoever just seems to be developing better, maybe you hold on to and draft and trade the other guy, or vice versa, and you could get some good value out of trading either Missi or Malawak. The draft could be the saving grace of this franchise because, as of right now, just the position that all the players and assets are in, once again, I just don't think very much is moving. So you really want a player who can absolutely hit at number 7. And I do think there's a good chance that the very best player we could draft at number 7 likely might be Con Knuppel. I wouldn't favor that, not because I don't believe in Con, but just because I think this team has had too many dookies in its history, and I especially wouldn't want a white one. No offense to JJ Redick. In all seriousness, I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth in this instance. Honestly, the 7th pick in a draft like this could really change things, but it's just kind of unfortunate that this is kind of the extent that the conversation can go at this point. And despite whatever other circumstances have changed over the past few seasons, as long as ownership remains the same, I don't expect we're going to see a big change in philosophy, which means, generally speaking, we're also going to continue to be playing it safe, making tweaks along the margins, continuing to just try and build through the draft, and hoping that some of the more problematic situations simply blow over. I've watched the team for long enough at this point that kind of just feels like the trajectory that things are headed. And so, as unfortunate as it is to say, until something major changes, in spite of any drama you've heard, most likely the Pelicans are not doing much this offseason, and things might basically just come down to another mess of mediocre nothingness.